Hello, my incisive friends, and welcome back to Alien Protocols. Yes, it's been a while. I've been really pondering over whether to do predictions over this year. Recently, our predictions have been incredibly accurate, from weather to Ukraine to just incredibly detailed specifics. Even the hot air balloon thingy seen over the US from two different angles and broadcast around the world. And I call it specifically a thingy, which I thought was interesting. And the exact battle order of the Ukraine war and when it would start. And this was in past the last January when we weren't even sure the war was going to start. And hitting of things like the Crimea Bridge after the beginning of the war, a couple of weeks after the beginning of the war, or so many different things from assassination attempts and a certain name who represented Wagner Group, I don't want to mention proper date, who's no longer with us. I had predicted his assassination attempt. And weather has been a real big part of my discussions for the past few years, and especially the fact that the Earth's electromagnetic field is at its weakest in 1,000 years, while the sun just happens to be at a solar maximum, meaning more and more solar activity, more and more waves and loops of these solar flares are going to come off the sun, and pieces of them are going to come to Earth, and pieces of them and waves of them are going to hit and destroy and affect satellites, warm the temperature of the Earth, and we're going to be seeing more storms and currents and volcanoes and flooding and lots of high winds and tornadoes along the East Coast, a lot of flooding. This is going to be true all over the place in South and Central America and in Russia and in Europe and in India and even in Australia and New Zealand. There's going to be a lot of these effects felt more and more. And this isn't just the atmospheric weather, high winds, flooding, events happening at weird times, tornadoes in January, things like that. Just like we predicted, this is about the sun's energy. These particles that come off the sun, a lot of them, the real powerful ones, are neutrinos. And those can really dive deep into planets. And they can really affect the geomagnetic fluids that create the electromagnetic dynamo of our planet. And already we've had major blackouts. Over 1 billion people are without power right now. Billions of people are without power. And these are the combination of the geo-electromagnetic field being at what I predict to be right now 35% of its field strength. When just 1,000 years ago, it was 100% and looked like a normal kind of battery magnet. It was kind of like a normal magnetic field like that. But now it's all screwy and wacky and doesn't look like a normal bar magnet like this. There's crazy loops and spots and places where they're calling them anomalies. So here's our South Pole, okay? And up here we have our North Pole. We have found that in the past, these have not flipped really, they reverse. And there's a big difference. A flip has kind of an indication that they just roll across the surface and it's no big deal. That's why I'm astonished to hear geologists say, only some sea animals, cetaceans, and birds will be misguided by this. Maybe, the hummingbird migration, the great monarch hummingbird migration might be slightly twerked, but everything else should be fine. Well, those guys are completely wrong, and they're idiots. And these are scientists, because if you look back at the history, the conclusive data from multiple independent sources, we know during pole reversals, what happens is the poles start to move, and ours are moving really fast now. And then they do something called, what I call, creating mini poles. NASA and others are calling them anomalies. There's a big one off the southeast coast of Brazil. There's also a big one over here near Africa. that's been growing and they've been very concerned about. And ironically, there's one right in the middle of the Ukraine, way over here. And these are not the traditional loops. You know, we could tell if they were traditional if they were more like this. But when a loop does something like this, and they're going sideways, something's wrong. You're not supposed to go sideways. They're supposed to go vertical like this. And we've been seeing a lot of these mini poles breaking up and traveling. And so what happens during these pole reversals is the energy that is spent maintaining this regular bar magnet field now is broken up into little pieces so that they can kind of promenade through each other. And the energy it takes to break up those pieces and do that promenade takes away from our global field strength. And this field strength is what protects us from the sun's damaging rays, from these polar flares, from these incredible, incredible events, micronovas, kilonovas, the Carrington event, etc. When solar flares break off from the sun and just happen to be pointing our direction. Now, the consequences of this are humongous. This is not just about, lost property damage or fields. This is a lot deeper. This is big natural disasters, extreme weather, longer weather conditions at higher rates of energy and more frequency. And we're already seeing it. It even affects under the surface, the volcanoes and earthquakes. Yellowstone right now is super, super active. And they predicted a lot of these different cities and places across the United States are going to be in a real jam in terms of energy and electricity and power loss, especially all along the east coast of the U.S. and across Canada. And you can tell this is due to the sun because we're seeing aurora borealises in places where we should be seeing them, in the lower latitudes. During a solar storm, you would see them more coming in from the top. You know, our planet is like a spaceship, like the spaceship Enterprise, flying through space, and the electromagnetic field is our shield system. And it protects us from all the cosmic rays and radiation and dangerous stuff that just comes from free space, as well as, of course, Klingons and Borgs, those insidious bastards. Anyway, you can imagine if our field strength goes to zero, how much damage the Earth would get. And that's exactly what happened the last pole flip. The last pole reversal was 42,000 years ago, the Adams event. And you can research this yourself. In New Zealand, they discovered that the tamir trees at one point had only a 0.006% of their regular high magnetic field, basically meaning they had no magnetic field coverage. Major radiation was hitting that area of New Zealand and killing everything. This is when all the megafauna died in the United States, especially in the southwest and northwest United States, but literally all over the world, because of course the Earth rotates. But depending on the tilt and the rotation can affect how much damage these waves cause. So anyone on the surface of a planet that's, if the whole thing is at 0.0006% strength, everything that goes out on the surface is going to be dying slowly, irradiated to death. That's when all the megafauna died 42,000 years ago. From the saber-toothed tiger, woolly mammoth, all sorts of other types of giant sloth, even other hominids died during this period. Most of the Neanderthals, Devisonians, very few survived, only really us and the ones that we have bred with other species, and Homo floresiensis, which lived alone, I believe, just in the Philippines. So all the other species of humans and big species, megafauna, as they say, died during the last pole reversal, gang. This is serious. And once you have satellites being affected and blown out, this creates all sorts of big problems, not only direct electrical problems and financial problems for countries around the world, but it also opens up opportunities for different countries with malicious interests to utilize this downed sensory information and time to do some sort of attacks, which I'm very fearful that this whole series of events can be utilized in that way. So, gang, there's a lot of solutions to these problems. And it seems like to me, Elon Musk is one of the very few people really considering the logical, because we know there have been past global mass extinctions. Let me say that again. Global mass extinctions. So that affects everyone. That turns our one planet not into a bunch of different countries. It turns it into one house that we all live in. And solar flares could be one of these reasons for mass global extinctions. And in fact, we're fairly certain it is. Also quasars and other big high energy events. But there's actually ways to defend ourselves, especially specific areas. Like if we wanted to protect certain areas of North America and the United States, we could set up a series of these CubeSats that are all interconnected, maybe meshed, have some mesh between them with flash capacitors on them. And those capacitors can, in a very short period of time, absorb a tremendous amount of energy. So if you had a series of these in a row on the way towards the places you wanted to protect on the planet, relative to the trajectory of the solar flares, you could literally minimize the damage from solar flares using this technique. It would have to be done at a large scale, and it would have to be done aggressively, and it's certainly one of the few very good mitigation techniques and ideas I've thought of for handling micronovas, essentially, and big geomagnetic storms. So here's just one solution. And there's going to be a lot of activity this year, guys. A lot more volcanoes. I'm going to put out a predictions list, even though this year I'm very reluctant to, because of all the things that are going to be happening. There's a lot of very intense stuff coming, my friends. And some beautiful, beautiful truths finally revealed. So stay tuned, stay informed, and if I were you, I would start protecting. I would even invest in companies that rebuild electronic infrastructure after disasters, because we know these are going to continue to happen. I know their stock advice, strictly as a non-professional and as an entertainment value, but if you do invest in one of the energy companies based on this, knowing that there's going to be a response, feel free to donate to a worthy cause to help show appreciation for this idea being successful if it's ever used. So this is all very realistic. And there's several other ways to address geomagnetic storms and the other greatest cause of global mass extinctions, and that's surface impacts and megavolcanoes. Both of those, the solution to both of those is building underground cities that are large enough for populations to grow into. Because one of the most frightening pieces of information I learned about New Zealand during the last electromagnetic pole flip, one of the most frightening pieces of information was how long there was not an electromagnetic field. This wasn't a month or 2 months or 3 months. This was years of super high radiation dose. So this is something we can really be prepared for. And if we had tunnels in cities, under our major cities, that were large enough to support a growing population, of course, included in all of those and in all of our space efforts, is the requirement for us to create better biosphere systems, self-contained, natural systems that can grow food and just be part of a natural environment that we can still stay integrated with and biologically healthy. So these are just some thoughts. And I am going to put out a prediction list and go back and look at our old Ukraine pictures we drew. The first three pictures before the war even started. The one of the giant battleship on fire, like the Moskva, and the quintessential image of a road with all those craters along it, which is the quintessential, Ukraine war image. So, what do you guys think? Do you think I'm right that this is more the reason for our global warming and extreme weather rather than carbon dioxide emissions? I would love to hear your thoughts. Much love.